Hello and welcome to the Gilded Age. And we're going to be talking about robber barons. And these are people who became extremely wealthy during the time of the Gilded Age and are kind of the leaders of industry during the Industrial Revolution. And they're very important not only socially but also economically. And this is really what they kind of are. They're the 1% that uh, were the wealthiest within the country as well. So it's important to note that robber barons did not invent anything. They just are managers of other people's ideas. And we're going to briefly look at four separate robber barons. We're going to look at Andrew Carnegie, um, uh, John D. Rockefeller. We're going to look at the Vanderbilt family, and it's Cornelius Vanderbilt and his family, as well as J.P. Morgan. And these are kind of the four larger of the robber barons. There's many more. Um, uh, you could say that Edison and the Edison Electric Company was part of the robber barons as well as we're going to talk about them about technology. But it's really important to understand these robber barons. And we're going to first look at Andrew Carnegie. And Andrew Carnegie's life dates are 1835 to 1919. And it's really important to note that he is actually a self-made man in the truest form. And this is really important to kind of this develops this understanding that anyone can be a self-made person and become wealthy. And this is the antithesis of the Gilded Age, that you could work your way up, have that American dream, struggle, and become the wealthiest man in America, or as one of the wealthiest men in the world, as Andrew Carnegie was. Um, However, as much as he was a self-made man, he was an opportunist. He was very stingy at one point with his finances, but actually at the end of his life, he believed that wealth should not be passed on, and that's very different than the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, and J.P. Morgan. So he ends up giving away all of his wealth towards the end of his life. It's also important to know, as much as these robber barons are extremely wealthy and very stingy, they also did a lot of entrepreneurship and gave back to a lot of causes. Um, in fact, some of the things that we still have today, such as our public library system, is directly because of Andrew Carnegie, as well as others. However, at the same time, as much as their wealth is incredible and they were entrepreneurials, they make their money off the backs of everyone else. And we're going to look into that a little bit. So, first, let us look at Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie, he, as I said, was a self-made man. He was from his family moved to the United States when he was a boy, but his dad was extremely poor. He was a gilded member in manufacturing, and guild as in not gilded age, as in guild. He worked for a guild, which is a group of workers that specialize in one certain thing, such as shoes or as a particular as like the dyeing guild for dyeing of textiles, or a textile guild. He belonged to a guild, and he worked in the textile industry. However, in the textile industry in England, he's laid off because of the Industrial Revolution in England, which begins in England. He wasn't able to feed his family, so they moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he worked in shops in a steam shop in 1840s. Well, Carnegie had to support his family as a teenager because his dad he was a broken man in many ways, and the fact that he wasn't able to support his family, and he goes into depression, he drinks a lot, he ends up kind of failing, according to Andrew Carnegie. So what Andrew does is he starts working in steam shops, and then eventually he works in a telegraph office, which is really kind of weird how he got into the telegraph office. Pretty much a telegram came to the shop he was working at, and then the delivery boy couldn't deliver, and he said, I can do this. So he went and did that. He ended up learning the um, telegraphy really quickly, and he was known as a smooth operator because he could type so fast and with so little mistakes. He ends up getting interested in railway systems, and by the time he's 29, he's fully independent, and he ends up produce cash worth $500,000. And so steel kind of catches his eye, and he's like, well, this is a good new manufacturing. And so he ends up investing into it, and wants a high class, a high grade quality of steel. And by 1873 onward, he ends up getting steel plants. He doesn't use the technology is actually created to work with steel in 1875 by Edgar Thomas Works. And they use the Bessemer technique, which is how to hone steel. And Carnegie ends up realizing this is really good. He is a big innovator. He believes in having innovation at all costs. And he ends up through investments and through kind of destroying the competition by doing high volumes with low prices. He ends up scooping up the market, and he takes kind of a monopoly in this market, in the steel industry. He produces the American Steel Company, um, and sorry, American Steel. Yeah. Yeah, American Steel Company. And in just to understand the usage of steel, in 1865, the U.S. used 19,000 tons of steel. By 1900, 10 million tons of steel were used, and this was for railroad manufacturing and others. And so he kind of saw that this was going to be a big deal. He ends up working kind of laterally, getting all these companies and buys people out, and he works shifts 24/7. And when machines die, instead of repairing them, he gets new ones. And he does this to have continual production. He has 24 hours a day, two shift, 12 hours is how it works. By 1881, 40% of the profit of his first year, 40% of the world's profit in steel he ends up having, and he personally takes millions of dollars. And this is partially because of there's no um, taxes on industries at this time, and there's no inheritance tax also. So he's able to take a lot of money. At 45, Carnegie reads a lot of English philosophers, and he reads about Buddhism and Confucianism, and he's a self-educated man, and he believed in having lots of books and to loan these books. And that's partially he made all of his money. He worked hard. He was known for being uncompromising, so much so that in the Homestead Steel um, Homestead Strike of 1892. And how this happened is that people within his company and outside are trying to form unions. And these unions, they wanted better pay, they wanted better hours, workman's comp, because if you're injured on the job, you would be fired immediately. And so what happens is that they wanted higher wages, but there's falling prices that are happening because of the flood of so much steel on the market. And Carnegie, what he wants to do, he wants to break the unions in Homestead. And but at the same time, when he orders his vice president Henry Frick to deal with this, he actually goes on vacation in Scotland to a castle that he had. And Carnegie is a firm believer of social Darwinism, and social Darwinism is was first done by Herbert Spencer. And this is they take Charles Darwin's survival of the fittest of species through reproduction and put it to social economic terms, that people will survive if they are the fittest, and if they are not, they will go down. So Carnegie believed himself the survival of the fittest. He was the fittest when it came to the steel industry, and that everyone else, if you were impoverished, if you were anything, that was your own circumstances that you didn't change. You weren't fit enough to survive, so therefore you didn't need to be there. Now, that is a brief thing of social Darwinism. It's vitally important to this period because it enhances how people look at the world socially. Henry Clay Frick, who is the VP of Carnegie Steel, ends up he says he's going to institute a wide cut, and this is approved by Carnegie. Carnegie approved everything. He did a sizable wage cut and he refused to negotiate. And Frick encircles the 600-acre grounds around Carnegie Steel with fence and water cannons and snipers. And he says if people are going to, they can either come into work or they're going to go on strike, and he's refused to allow replacement. Frick brings in 300 guards to deal with the strike. The strikers end up trying to blow up a barge that kills 16 people and injures 67. And Carnegie stands firm. And it takes 5 months to crush this union and to have people. By the way, people who cross from the union picketing into the manufacturer industry to work is known as scabs, and there were a lot of scabs that came on. It ended up having 8,500 soldiers were sent to put down the strike, and the president was asked to send in the military by Carnegie. And this happened in multiple places, including in the Silver Strike in Idaho. Carnegie makes no apologies and sends a telegraph to Frick once the strike is ended, saying, "Though the war at last, what a relief, and now for a long period of peace and prosperity." Um, Again, Carnegie wasn't even in the country when this happened, but this ended the strike for Carnegie Steelworkers. They end up working, the people that came back to work end up working for a fraction of what they had previously did. And the strike ends up ending because Carnegie and Frick go to the workers, Carnegie is still in Scotland, goes to the workers and say, "We are going to negotiate with you, give you the demands." The day before negotiation was supposed to happen, they fire everyone who was previously working there and rehire a new group of people, and they don't feel bad about it. Carnegie still ends up, at one point, owns 25% of all the steel production in the entire world. He ends up being one of the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest man in the world, and he has so much wealth that during the Spanish-American War, with the acquisition of the Philippines, that Carnegie offers to write the president a $25 million check to cover the cost of the striking. It ends up, the president refuses to do this, and Carnegie, it's very rare that Carnegie would do this, or that anyone would write a check that would allow the freedom of another country. Carnegie does that. Like again, towards the end of his life, he doesn't keep any of his wealth. He ends up giving it away to charities. Most importantly, they start the Carnegie Foundation, which starts like Carnegie Hall, the library systems, as well as they also have most organs in various churches were donated at one point by Carnegie, or initially they had. I'm sure they've been replaced since then. But Carnegie had this belief, and he writes in The Gospel of Wealth, which is his kind of memoir slash philosophy of wealth, that we shouldn't allow this to be left per person. We shouldn't continue the ownership of money that we have upon our deaths. And so Carnegie leaves very little money to his children, where the fact that he had so much money towards the end of his death. The reason why he has so much money is because he ends up selling the American Steel Company it to through J.P. Morgan and to the government, and they end up starting their own company, and he walks away with $48 million, which is an obscene amount of money at the time, and becomes one of the richest men at the moment. And Carnegie and the American Steel Company is still going strong. Today it's still being used, and this is a direct result of Andrew Carnegie.